Hi everyone, so like promised, I'm finally making that video on the Adama Family Cylon Conspiracy, or the AFCC, as I call it for easiness. So, where to start? There are about 4 pages of outline notes for this, because over the years it's grown to subsume my life. Not really, I just sometimes cry in the shower about it. But, so hopefully I'm only gonna have to break this into 2 videos, but we'll find out. Also, spoiler warning for everything that's been released in the Battlestar Galactica universe thus far. Um, so, how did this get started? So, essentially, I wanted Zach Adama to be alive. And there's no real way to do that since we know he's dead, we saw the body, it was sad. But, basically, okay, there are several things you have to accept for this to work out, which is subbing out Tori with Caroline Adama for one of the final Cylons. That Daniel, the 7th Cylon model, is Kara's father, and that's Cavill knows there's more than one cybrid than Hera, which is kind of easy to accept because Cavill likes to keep secrets, and that they've figured out how to make cybrids resurrect. Which would explain why Kara was kind of a fan favorite for experimentation by the Cylons. So, talk about foreshadowing. So, my little 15-year-old self, back when season 4 was just getting started, and Kara reappears out of the abyss in her Viper, and Lee, as a throwaway line to Bill, asks what he would have done if it was Zach stepping off of that Viper instead of Kara, because as I'm sure you all remember, Bill was essentially ready to shoot her out the airlock, and everybody thought it was a silent trick. But, so when I was a lot younger, I thought, like, oh my god, Zach's gonna be alive. And at the same time, there was a lot of people trying to argue that Zach was gonna be the final Cylon, because there's this thing called the Returner canon, which is a comic book series where Zach actually is alive and returns due to Cylon experimentation. Anyway, Zach, I love him. I know, which is strange because he died pre-series and only has 2 flashbacks, and that's all we know about Zach. So, the Adama Family Cylon Conspiracy. Let's go back to the start. Caprica, the TV show, not the planet, although technically that too. So as we know, Tamara dies in the terrorist attack, and Joe Adama goes solely mad in his grief and colludes with Greystone Industries and the Holothos and the kid until they decide to kill him, to create the Cylons. So I think a good storytelling motive would be to tie the fate of the Cylons to the fate of the Adama family, which would make sense. Additionally, Moore has acknowledged in post-series interviews that later seasons of Caprica is going to reveal that Tamra was going to be Beta 8 and Zoe was going to be Beta 6. And they were going to work with the final 5 during the end of the Cylon War to create the 8. This is kind of interesting too, just because one of the big themes in this universe is what is a soul? What does it mean to have a soul? So one of the big things about Tamara and Zoe living on in V-World is, do they have souls, or did they really truly die when their bodies died in the attack? Another thing to do with this is when Tamara evolves to become the Sharon line. Did her consciousness become subsumed by Sharon? Does she still live on in the stream? Tamara, as I think I've pointed out before in Battlestar Galactica name meta, and it's my tag for her on Tumblr, is the goddess of the stream. Tamara is the English goddess of streams and rivers, which I think probably would have meant something, because Moore does usually pick really meaningful names for his characters that go on to mean things, like Adama, which means earth in Hebrew. Oh my god. and other things. There's a post, I'll link to it. So, in the AFCC, Tamra and Zoe are found in the remnants of V-World by the Five, because I'm assuming V-World is something that resembles the stream at that point, after Tamra and Zoe kind of hacked it and made it into their own domain and became queens of it. Whatever. So she and Zoe work with the Five to create Cavil and the rest of the models, and for the purpose of this, Cavil boxes them after the rebellion, and instead of sending them to Earth, because obviously they were real people who existed beforehand, and if you saw a girl who supposedly died 30 years ago walking around the street, it would be a little confusing for some people. And as we know, during the rebellion, Cavil destroys the Daniel model out of jealousy, and for the sake of storytelling, a few escape and survive, and one of them goes on to marry Socrata and is the father to Kara, who then, just by virtue of escaping, knows that Tamra survived and that she's an Adama and knows that Zoe's survived and is a Greystone. But before the Five get their memory erased, Tamra makes them promise to look out for her brother, who, I know, she probably, it's arguable how much emotional attachment she has to Bill, but considering that she's one of the indirect causes of this whole war and the creation of the Cylons and the evolution and this whole mass violence that's going on that Bill is currently fighting in as a young guy, and she probably feels bad. She did have a very strong emotional attachment to her father, her mother, and her brother, another doomed William Adama. So I'd like to think that she somehow managed to keep tabs on him through Tad Thorian and what have you, and especially after she might have taken another bodily form after the Five came back and found her conscious. They might have found a way to resurrect her, because they know how to do skin job technology. So she makes them promise, after she's getting uploaded to the stream, to become 8, but manages to survive, obviously, for the purpose of this. And then Cavil erases their memories, but they still remember to protect Bill, because obviously Saul and Bill have this epic romance, and Ellen's there too and hits on him a lot, and Caroline obviously marries him, and Galen looks up to him as a role model, and everything, and Sam's different, remember that. Same time, Daniel's ditching Kara. Why? Is it because Cavil found him? Possibly. Obviously, Daniel and Kara had some kind of bond, because there's a sort of emotional resonance that follows her several years later and leads to her extreme daddy issues. See? That's why she's an Adama. She has daddy issues. Sometimes after this, Daniel meets Carol Ann, and they become engaged, and Daniel is the fiancé that Lee was referring to in the mini-series when talking to Bill, trying to throw emotional mud in his face. Yes, so let's assume that many years later, Daniel meets Carol Ann again and recognizes her as one of the final 5. This probably happens after Zach dies, I'm just assuming based off of storytelling and what we've heard from Lee. That maybe Daniel sees Cavil hanging around Carol Ann. We know that Cavil went back to die with Ellen, and then found her that she hadn't changed and was highly disgruntled and let her survive and suffer more. So, maybe Zach's death was Carol Ann suffering more? Or maybe Cavil only needed one cybrid child and Zach was the spare. There are a lot of reasons Cavil would probably be motivated to kill Zach, one of which was maybe he had his DNA and wanted to test out cybrid resurrection. So Zach was the test case.